Hi, everyone. Thanks, Heather and the Empath community for having me here. I'm so excited to share this webinar and information on the thyroid with you. But before we get started, I really wanted to ask you to take a moment and just set your intention for this class. What do you want to take away, and how will you use the information you're going to learn today? Because some of this information is going to help you become empowered with information you can use to make big changes with your health and impress your doctor with some incredible knowledge. So take a moment to set some intentions and we'll get started. But first, the agenda, just quickly. So we're going to cover a lot of information, and I'm going to go at a quick clip and allow you to ask any questions in the community, the Empath community, or you can also send me an email as well. But my main intention for our time together is to forever change how you see your thyroid and have some really life-changing insights and connections between your lifestyle, your thyroid, your brain, your adrenals, your gut, and your liver, but so that you can see the connections and you can end up feeling and looking more fabulous than ever. But so I am Heather Tesch, and I'm a functional medicine coach, and I actually suffered from hypothyroidism and adrenal dysfunction for years before being diagnosed. I had all the classic signs, I was fatigued all the time, major lethargy, insomnia, constipation, dry skin, feeling cold, muscle weaknesses, depression. There's actually some days I could barely get out of bed, and it literally felt like I was hit by a bus. Super, super frustrating. I didn't feel heard by doctors. I was dismissed. I left doctor's offices crying. I had a miscarriage once, and I actually brought my thyroid labs to the doctor, and she didn't know what any of the labs meant. That was after I had gone to school for functional medicine, and I had to educate her on that. And since that point, I realized that women aren't getting the comprehensive care they deserve. And so that's when I decided to open up my own practice and help women who are struggling with chronic conditions, hormonal problems, the like. So I've been there, I understand, and I am excited to be able to share the information I've learned on my journey with you. So hopefully you don't have to go through what I have been through. But let's just get started. So, did you guys know that conservative estimates are that 200 plus million people worldwide suffer from a thyroid related illness? The vast majority are women. I think there's actually like 10 times more, it's more common in women than men. And over half of the cases are undiagnosed, and we're going to just discover why that might be. But first, let's cover some basics and discuss where your thyroid is and what it does. So the thyroid is the gland located here in the front of your trachea, I guess more commonly known as the windpipe or the Adam's apple. And it's shaped a lot like a butterfly. And let's see if I can get a little pointer here. Yeah, right here. It's shaped like a butterfly, as you can see here. And I'd actually say that there's a lot of similarities between the two. Both are very delicate, yet they're sensitive to change, but both are very, very resilient. So it's kind of ironic that they both, the thyroid looks so much like a butterfly. It's also about voicing your truth, and I feel like butterflies are about that as well. But let's go ahead and just talk about the biochemistry. So this little butterfly in your throat impacts everything metabolic in the body. Now, when I say metabolic, I don't just mean like weight loss or weight gain, as that's kind of what most of us think about it as. But when I say metabolic, I mean making everything in your body work. It's the basic functioning of your body. It is the cellular energy that makes you go swiftly every day. It's what makes you maintain your life, essentially. And your thyroid has a big part of this. So it impacts your digestive system, your mood, your emotions, mental clarity, skin health, immune function, even how you utilize cholesterol. And it helps synthesize hormones like progesterone, which is needed for fertility, and cortisol, which is needed for immune function. So as you can see, if we have sluggish thyroid, we literally have sluggish everything in the body. I hope that's making sense so far. Um, as a spiritual, I should say, like empathic, highly sensitive person, I like to also dig into the connections to the emotional world as well, and how emotions can actually like manifest in physical symptoms. And especially as empaths, we take on a lot of energy and emotions, and we are highly sensitive and emotional beings. So I think it's important to talk about this as well. But energetically, the thyroid is linked through the throat chakra, which is one of the 7 chakras that make up our whole being. And when underactive, there is this feeling of like heaviness and depression, like emotionally wise. And when it is throat chakra is overactive, there is an oversensitivity and like being of hyper alert, maybe with seeing some chaos as well. And also the thyroid is really, or the throat chakra is about voicing your truth. And we'll get into more of that later. But when your body has been trying to communicate to you and address certain emotions, that's impacting your thyroid and your throat chakra. So a lot of times, if we're not listening to those communications, those messages, our thyroid will be affected. It's kind of fascinating. But this is the big heavy lifter that we're going to talk about today. And this is called the HPAT Axis. It stands for hypothalamus, the pituitary, the adrenal, and the thyroid. And this is one big feedback loop that happens. Let me see if I can move my picture. So these these two part of the brain, the adrenal and the thyroid, are always constantly talking to each other. And the hypothalamus is releasing a hormone called thyrotropin releasing hormone, or TRH, you can see. I'll just call it releasing hormone just to keep it simple. And then the pituitary releases the thyroid stimulating hormone, and I'll just call that the stimulating hormone. And then the adrenal glands play a big role because they release cortisol, and cortisol is a master hormone, and that impacts the thyroid directly, which we'll go into. But anyways, so the hypothalamus releases thyrotropin releasing hormone. It releases the releasing hormone based off of what it senses is going on in the body. So it goes and tells the pituitary gland, hey, it's okay, now let's release the stimulating hormone. Tell the thyroid to release thyroid hormone. So then the pituitary then tells the thyroid to release thyroid hormone. So you can see that TSH is a brain hormone, and hypothalamus is a big part of this as well. But TSH as a brain hormone is not a thyroid hormone. Okay, I'll let you sit with that for a minute because I know it's kind of a lot of information. Let's see, I'm actually going to go on to, go to the next page. If I come back, I might have to come back to this to explain some more. But so we have TSH, and this is what you normally see on your labs. TSH is not a thyroid hormone, it's a brain hormone. So you can see how so many people can get misdiagnosed or undiagnosed based off of their labs if it's just being thyroid stimulating hormone being run. Then we have T4. So T4 is the main hormone thyroid makes. It's actually an inactive form. So then we need T3. So T4 here converts to T3. And T3 is the actual active thyroid hormone or active hormone that has all its effects on our metabolism. So we have TSH, then we have T4, and then we have T3. So let's go back to this slide. Oh, I can't. Okay. So you remember that HPAT axis. So the hypothalamus and pituitary gland are sensing what is going on in the body. They're like, okay, is there enough T4 and T3 being made? If not, okay, then the hypothalamus says, pituitary gland, time to kick out stimulating hormone. And then the stimulating hormone is like, hey, thyroid, time to produce more T4. And if it senses that there's enough, then it stops producing it. So it's kind of like a thermostat in your house. So when the thermostat senses that the heat is high enough, it stops. It turns off, right? It turns the furnace off. But if the heat comes down, then the thermostat senses it and is like, all right, furnace kick back on, we need more heat. And then it does the whole cycle all over again. That is essentially what is happening with this feedback loop. So another point here was that we see that, okay, so now we have the brain involved in this, we have the adrenal glands involved in this, and we have the thyroid, but now we also have the liver, the kidneys, and the GI tract. So these are important for that conversion of T4 to T3. So if any of these are struggling or out of balance, then this conversion may not be effective or may not happen at all in some folks. The other thing to note is a lot of people who do have thyroid problems can go on medication, but those medications might actually be simply T4. But if they're having that conversion of T4 to T3 if that conversion isn't happening for them, then the doctor ends up boosting or increasing their dose of their T4 medication in hopes to keep it, to show up in labs that it's working. But in reality, what could be happening is that this conversion isn't happening and we're not getting the metabolic effects of this T3. So oftentimes people, it's a good idea to have a conversation about getting a thyroid medication that is T4 and T3. And normally naturopathic doctors can get a hormone therapy, bio replacement hormone therapy for thyroid with both of these hormones in it. All right, moving on. I hope that's making sense, you guys. So we're talking about the endocrine system here, right? So hormones are messenger molecules and we can't just focus on sex hormones separately from stress hormones, separately from metabolic hormones. They all are connected. So let's just look at, like if you have estrogen dominance, which could be like too much estrogen, or it might be estrogen and progesterone out of balance. If you have too much estrogen, that then binds up that thyroid hormone and doesn't leave enough for thyroid or for a cellular effect. So then you can have hypothyroid symptoms. And the other thing is if we look at the adrenal glands, which we'll go into a little more detail here, but the adrenals need to produce enough cortisol to help stimulate that T4 to T3 conversion. So cortisol is a stress hormone, so we can see how that is impacting our thyroid hormone. Insulin is a metabolic hormone. And metabolic insulin resistance, having too much insulin, can also create hypothyroid types of dynamics. And if you also have elevated blood sugar, which normally then, insulin resistance comes for the ride, but elevated blood sugar creates inflammation, and that inflammation prevents that conversion of T4 to T3 in the cells. So all of our hormones are very interconnected and impact one another. And they're messenger molecules, meaning they're getting a sense of what's going on in our world, not just physically, but our thoughts as well. It starts up here in the brain, and then the body follows the mind. So here's the adrenal gland connection that I wanted to talk about. Um, Adrenal glands, they produce hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and they're made from cholesterol. So yes, we do actually need some cholesterol. It's essential building block to hormones and cell membrane health. But there are numerous hormones, including DHEA, that the adrenals produce. But for today, we're going to talk about primarily cortisol, or like the sustained stress hormone. So cortisol is a master hormone. It regulates nearly everything in the body, including other hormones. So yes, even the thyroid. It's involved in the response to illness and helps us to regulate our metabolism. And it also helps to free up glucose to get into the cell for energy. It has anti-inflammatory effects. So it's really, really, really important to have a good balance. And cortisol is also essential for our having a healthy stress response. But let's see. The thing is that, so the adrenal gland, I'm just going to go on to the next page. The adrenal gland has this almost like a friendship with the thyroid, almost like they're like best friends of sorts. So optimal thyroid health comes down also to the health of your adrenal gland. So as we can see here, this happy thyroid, uh, we have to have a good amount, not too much, not too little, of cortisol in order to help that conversion of T4 to T3. If we have too much cortisol, that T4 hormone gets converted to reverse T3. Reverse T3 is like a storage hormone and takes up space for that T3 hormone that we want, to have. So we don't want to have too much cortisol, because then that high stress state then brings us into a reverse T3 hypothyroid state. But we also need to have enough. So if we don't have enough cortisol, then that T4 to T3 conversion doesn't happen, because that cortisol, a healthy oomph of cortisol, is what helps to, give us energy. And so if we don't have that oomph, that boost for that T4 to T3 conversion to happen, then it's not going to happen, and then we could have a sluggish thyroid. So stress, then, as you can see, plays a huge role in our thyroid health. Like, a huge role. I've seen so many folks who have too high of cortisol levels, and then their reverse T3 is really high and their free T3 is low. So having healthy stress levels, and a lot of time that also is about, again, the mind, what we perceive as stress, because everybody perceives stress differently. And then also, how we respond to stress. And the quote in the other slide said, 90% of life is not what happens to us, but it's how we respond. Only 10% is what happens to us in life. So it's about how we respond to stress. And stress can also not just be mental, emotional, it can also be physiological, such as food sensitivities or gut infections or toxicity, which we'll talk about here in a minute too. But just to sum up, the adrenal glands need to be really happy to be able to have this intimate, close, friendly relationship with the thyroid. So thyroid dysfunction is often a symptom of, like, a result of a deeper underlying problem. So just as the thyroid impacts nearly everything in the body, this means that itself is impacted by everything in the body. In functional medicine world, the thyroid is often actually referred to as the canary in the coal mine. Often it's the first gland that's often to suffer from systemic inflammatory surges or imbalances. And like the classic canary in a coal mine, a struggling thyroid gland may be an early wake-up call to like persistent effects of stress, inflammation, and really toxicity. The thyroid is very, very sensitive to toxins. So you can see here, toxins is at the top of this diagram, and some common toxins that particularly impact the thyroid are mercury. So you could think of like mercury fillings. There's, let's see, mercury fluoride. Fluoride in water is also a toxin. I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But those are some common ones. And then you have, let's see, GI dysfunction. So this can be constipation, diarrhea, because then you're not absorbing any nutrients, and we need nutrients to support the thyroid. That could be toxins from like bacterial overgrowth, candida overgrowth, things like that. HPA dysfunction, that's the adrenal again, so if the adrenals aren't working properly. Nutrient imbalances, there are specific nutrients that the thyroid needs, and we'll go into these later. Decreased oxygen here. So oxygen is needed to fuel metabolism. So need I say more? Blood sugar dysregulation. So that if we have a lot of like hyper or hypo type of blood sugar situations where they're either high or low, or constant up and down, that is going to put a lot of stress on the adrenal glands. And we know the importance of the adrenal glands. As well, if it's chronically high, that creates a lot of inflammation. And inflammation, as I mentioned earlier, can prevent that T4 to T3 conversion in the cells. So keeping our blood sugar stable is honestly, I'd say, is one of the most foundational aspects of optimal hormone health and cardiovascular health. And then immune dysregulation, just being having low immune nutrients, weak immune system, just puts your thyroid more at risk for damage. Okay, so this is just a slide to show, the different types of thyroid dysfunction. Let's see here. So on the left here is like a squirrel, they're kind of like hyperactive and a little all over the place. So you could think of that as like hyperthyroidism. And excuse me, this is where excess amounts of T3 and T4 are being produced and released. And that can cause then disruptions throughout the whole body. And symptoms, I guess, of hyperthyroid are similar characteristics to what you might find in like Tigger, restlessness, things are running really quickly, so they might have really fast bowel movements, they can get anxious or nervous like frequently, they might have like trouble concentrating. There's a bunch of them, but those are some of the big ones. And the hypothyroidism here on the right is like, representing of a sloth. And hypothyroidism is kind of like the flip side of hyperthyroidism, where there's too little T3 and T4 being made, and approximately like I think 10 million Americans are likely to have this hypothyroid condition. Again, most of them men, but you can think of hypothyroidism like the sloth. It's just, or Eeyore, if we want to use the poo analogy, but the body runs a little too slowly, so they might have like weight gain or stubborn weight if you're trying to lose weight, fatigue or malaise, low energy, not able to get out of bed, feeling cold. And I want to point out that not everybody who has hypothyroidism has weight issues. Not everyone. So there could be, other different symptoms they're experiencing. But one thing that a lot of folks aren't aware of, for hypothyroidism on lab markers, one thing you could look for is increased LDL cholesterol. Just because everything is sluggish in the body, so the body's sluggish at clearing it out. Another interesting one for hypothyroidism is thinning on the eyebrows, on the outside of the eyebrows. So what do we want? We want to have this little happy bear. We want to have, or Pooh, who's balanced and happy and everything is working just smoothly as can be. So let's go into a little bit more of this, the energy aspect of the thyroid. So as I mentioned, it is the throat chakra here, this little teal spot. Um, and we can think of, when we're thinking of the hyperthyroid, I guess, when it comes to throat chakra, of expending like lots of energy. And this normally requires a great deal of like outward focus rather than turning inward. So for these folks, it's difficult to slow down. There will be tendency to take over the lives of those that they love. And in doing so, they don't prioritize their own life. They might have a strong need for validation from others, especially by people that they're close to. They might have high expectations for themselves. And they might actually feel some rage sometimes too, being left out. So it causes irritability. It can create weight loss, excess perspiration, and even some weakness. But hypothyroidism, on the other hand, is almost like emotional hibernation. They're afraid of taking over their lives. They're afraid of taking charge. They're afraid of stepping forward to what they want. They're afraid to show up in the world. I can say, honestly, that's me. In doing so, they can lose out on their happiness, health, and their prosperity. So this may have they may have, I guess, may find it difficult to ask for things as a child. And then eventually they just give up asking for those things. And that can be even made worse by a lack of forgiveness for those who held you back. Um, because of that, I guess that lack of movement, there's a great deal of unexpressed frustration and resentment, and that can build up and turn inwards, and that's when you can start feeling like being stuck. And so then you don't voice your truth anymore. You're afraid of voicing your truth. Your self-expression is suppressed. You might not listen to your intuitive impulses anymore. Um, I don't know about you guys. If you have hypothyroidism, I can relate to all of that. So there's a lot of this energetic, emotional side connected to the thyroid that needs to be honored as well when going through the healing process. So just take a moment. You can pause the recording if you want, um, or you can skip through, but just take a moment and think about when you have pushed down your feelings and your voice, and maybe you just hold them in. Maybe you use like substances like sugary foods or negative beliefs to push them down. Just take a moment, and journaling about this can really be really healing and open up a lot of insight into ourselves. Okay, so if you've done your journaling, if you've thought a little bit about that last question, let's go ahead and start just going into solutions, right? We all want solutions. So the first solution here is a big one. This impacts, I think, everything in our life. But as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, stress is a huge one. We need to deal with the stress. So if we're living in a constant state of fight or flight, that can tax the adrenal glands like no tomorrow. And when the adrenal glands are taxed, that suppresses the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, both which, as we saw in that HPAT axis, influence our thyroid function. So this is a critical piece, you guys, I don't want you to miss out on. Our thoughts, as I mentioned before, the stress comes from here. Our thoughts matter. How we perceive our life and the world around us matters. Our body is literally always following our mind. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever read a book or watched a movie, like a suspenseful movie or suspenseful book, and you got so into it, you started like your muscles started tensing up, you start sweating, your heart rate started going like crazy, and you could just feel yourself like getting tense. So that's not actually happening to you, but your brain perceives it and thinks it is, and your body responds. So our brain doesn't know the difference between what we're thinking and what's actually happening. So that's why our thoughts really play a huge role in this, in our thyroid health. And the other thing is, I don't know about you guys, but I'm really great at putting on a front and looking like I'm not stressed, but I am. Um, and we can't fake out our body. So the body always knows what we're ruminating on, or what we're suppressing. The body has this like innate wisdom that knows how to respond to our conscious and even our subconscious thoughts. So always try to, work on how you're perceiving stress, and making that conscious choice and the courageous choice for not being stressed. And again, as I mentioned, stress can also be physiological. It could be food sensitivities, inflammatory foods, and it can be gut infections or hidden infections, as well as traumas, emotional traumas that we have suppressed. So choose calm and nurturing, you guys. Just think about being on vacation, eliciting those feelings as often as you can. So including more self-care, and self-care doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be just taking a 10-minute bath at night with some Epsom salts, which has magnesium and is calming. And then playing. We don't play enough as adults. So simply just take time to do some more playing and sparking more joy into your days. The other one also seems, these are all pretty unsexy things, but they're all very critical, foundational, but critical. So sleep. We know how important sleep is to our overall well-being, but especially the thyroid. So what's interesting is that thyroid dysfunction can actually lead to sleep disturbance as well. So it's a vicious cycle. But I'm a firm believer that sleep is the most important factor in health because it affects everything in our body. It affects our choices. It affects how we show up the next day and how we feel the next day, and how we feel the next day is going to impact how we choose the next day. So sleep, and more sleep. Uh, and having optimal sleep actually can be impacted by our adrenal glands, by how much cortisol we're making at night and how much melatonin we're making at night, because cortisol rises in the morning and falls as the day goes on. So that as it falls, it gets its at least amount at night, so that melatonin can take over so we can sleep. And having optimal sleep then supports optimal levels of stress and sex hormones. If we don't get enough sleep, the next day cortisol levels rise. And also glucose rises with that, and also insulin rises with that. So you can kind of see the pattern here, all the cortisol, insulin, glucose, those all impact the thyroid function. So sleep is super important. Let's see if there's anything else I want to add. So just to make this point more clear, we want to really focus on choosing calm and nurturing before bed. So taking 2 hours, ideally. I know that seems like a lot, but it can take that long for the body to unwind, where you're not doing any budgeting, you're not doing any conversations or tough conversations, you're not doing any housework, no work like emails, nothing, where you can just relax and unwind, so your melatonin levels can come up and you could sleep. And we also know, right, that lack of sleep also suppresses the immune system because of the high cortisol, and that can lead you to more prone to infections and toxicity, and that impairs your adrenals and your thyroid. So sleep. The next one here is something you might not have thought about. It's kind of a little eccentric, but eating hygiene. So if you look at this picture, which one do you think would lead to more vibrancy? one on the left with the chocolate all over the face, or the one on the right? Although the chocolate looks pretty darn good. Yeah, the one on the right. So how we eat actually impacts directly how well we absorb our nutrients, which are required for cellular metabolism and thus function on thyroid function. So all too often, we're always on the go in our society, and we gulp down our food so fast, or while we're doing household chores or running between meetings. But when we eat in a stress state, that tells our gut we're not safe. Tells our thyroid we're not safe. In that when we're not safe, digestion isn't a top priority. So instead, what is survival? Our body is always prioritizing survival. So digestive secretions needed to digest, absorb, and get nutrients into the cell are slowed way down, or sometimes even stopped. Like, they can be stopped, and that can lead you to feeling like bloated and gassy and having indigestion and reflux and all that. But it also creates hypothyroid function because we're not getting the nutrients into our body that we need. So again, it comes down to choosing not to be stressed, but choosing instead to be calm and nurturing, to make time for you to sit down, to make your meal sacred. Because you guys, after all, what we eat today and how we eat today influences how we show up tomorrow. It literally is shaping our bodies for tomorrow. All right, and diet. Some of my favorite parts. So these are things we want to avoid, obviously. These foods, as we know, are all highly inflammatory foods. Trans fats, they actually still exist, even though the US says they ban them, they exist. They are in all the fried foods, and sometimes they're even in processed foods, but they're not listed because I think they don't, if they're not above a certain limit, like 0.5 or something, they don't need to be listed in the nutrition label. So trans fats, sugar and refined carbs, this throws off that blood sugar balance that I was mentioning earlier. And is highly inflammatory. It also doesn't feed the good guys, the good bacteria in our gut. It feeds some of the bad bacteria that we don't want to be flourishing. And as I said, the gut is part of what converts T4 to T3, so we need a healthy gut. And the last one is gluten. So gluten, especially for people who are really who have thyroid dysfunction, who are super sensitive, who have autoimmune activation, their sensitivity to gluten, and they need to remove it. Gluten can activate a protein called zonulin, and zonulin can eat away at the gut lining, and that can create something called leaky gut, and that leaky gut can create a whole bunch of toxicity and inflammation downstream. But people who do remove this, especially if they're sensitive or they have thyroid dysfunction, can notice big results pretty quickly, from GI improvements to joint improvements to skin improvements to mood improvements. And those who have hypothyroid and depression can feel incredibly better without gluten. And gluten is hiding in almost everything these days too. So it's important to do your research to find where gluten is. I do have a gluten handout. If you want it, just feel free to email me. But you can also go on celiac, I think celiac.org. They might also, I think it's it. They have some good resources for getting rid of gluten. And the last one not featured here is to avoid food sensitivities. And food sensitivities, you can get a food sensitivity test. I can order that. Otherwise, doing an elimination diet is like the gold standard as well. Okay, so what is it? What kind of foods can you eat? So look at the color. It's like night and day. There's so much more color on the screen than there was on the last screen. Everything else over there was like brown. But whole foods diet, you guys, is the way to go, right? Not just for your thyroid, but for optimal vitality and sustained wellness. But to hone in here on the thyroid, let's look at these specific nutrients. So a diet rich in iodine, which we can find in sea vegetables. No, I'm not a big fan of sea vegetables. So you can actually get like kelp sprinkles. They come into a little container. I don't know, like a salt shaker container. They don't taste like fishy, it tastes like salt. And you can sprinkle it on salads and on anything you can put in your smoothies, and you'll get tiny bits of doses of iodine. And this is a good, easy way to increase iodine. You don't want to overdo it because that can lead to like iodine toxicity. So go very slow with that. Working with a practitioner is a good idea. Selenium is, you can find this in Brazil nuts, about like 5 a day, 3 to 5 a day. Selenium is also really good for the immune system. Vitamin A, and yes, eating the yolk, that is where the nutrients lie. Having eggs, vitamin A is also great for, oh man, what is it not? Vitamin A is really great for the immune system, eye health, and skin health. So you can eat a couple eggs every day. And remember, cholesterol is a good thing. We need cholesterol. If we don't eat it, our liver will make it so that we can make hormones and keep our cell membranes healthy. The other one is zinc. Zinc is often found in, well, those are oysters. I'm not a big fan of oysters either. But you can also get it in some meats as well. And then iron. Iron is found in red meats in particular. Let's see, I'm trying to see if I can find some other, I took some notes of where zinc. Yeah, it's mainly oysters. And then we have protein. So we actually need amino acids, particularly tyrosine, in order to make T4. So being able to not just eat the protein, but to be able to actually digest it, you have to have enough stomach acid to do that, enough enzymes to do that, to absorb it, and then to get it into the cell for action. Let's see, I think that is probably a good amount of information. So these all kind of have specific functions. Iodine is good for T4 hormone, so is selenium. But they're also, they just support thyroid hormone in general and the conversion of T4 to T3. So these nutrients are very, very important, you guys. And the other one, you guys, is something that not many folks talk about, and it's to get rid of fluoride. Yeah, it's funny because it's in our drinking water and it doesn't actually need to be there. But fluoride depletes iodine, and as you saw from the left side, we need iodine for our thyroid function. So iodine is the synthesis of T4, and there are fluoride is in obviously our water supply, so I recommend getting a really good water filter. Berkey, B-E-R-K-E-Y, is a really great brand. Berkey, and then I would also recommend getting rid of any fluoride toothpaste because that constant ingestion of fluoride is going to impact your thyroid big time. So there are really great fluoride-free toothpaste out there. Tom's is a good brand. Desert Essence, that's my favorite one. So you can get those anywhere. They're like all over the place now. But really focusing on also the water. The Berkey, I think it's a reverse osmosis system. So if it is, then you need to buy trace minerals to replace the minerals that are filtered out through the reverse osmosis system. The other thing is chlorine also can actually deplete iodine as well. So if you're a big swimmer, like in chlorine pools, swim like every day, that you might want to look into checking your iodine levels. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about mindset again, just briefly, because I did mention how stress is a lot to do with our perception. And our mindset comes down to that as well because the body follows the mind. So I say stress is perception because You know, what might stress you out doesn't stress me out. What might stress me out might not stress you out. So it's really very much emotional and a physical perception. And when what we think is stressful, those thoughts will automatically create a biochemical reaction in our body, like that movie example. You'll get that faster heartbeat, shallow breathing, sweaty palms, etc. But it's real. And what we choose to focus on can either help us manage the stress response, to manage it better, or it can escalate it. So we do want to make sure we're being more resilient and adaptable to different life stressors, because yes, like, I mean, the stress does exist, you know. So we just want to be doing things proactively to help us be more resilient to stress. And then if there is a stressful event, maybe try seeing if there's some kind of silver lining. I know that's not always possible. But things like getting out in nature every day, listening to favorite music, dancing, connecting with loved ones, creatively expressing yourself, meditation or prayer, you know, daily meditation, I think I said that, daily movement, resting, consuming healthy meals, and especially as empaths, especially as highly sensitive people, we really need to be on top of our self-care game, because I feel like we're like sponges, right? So we absorb everything that's coming in. So we need to be really careful and mindful about what we are putting into our minds and our bodies. We want to be more careful about bringing in more vitamin J, joy, bringing in more vitamin L, laughter, bringing in more vitamin P for play, vitamin silliness, right? We need to be able to bring these into our days more, and be more in touch with our body's inner wisdom and what it's needing. And this is a affirmation that can be helpful for the thyroid. And I think I have another one to share too. This one as well. It's safe for me to express my feelings and to create the life I desire. So these can be really powerful to add into your days, just to help, you know, put out that positive energy into the universe, and you'll get that energy back. So the last thing, I don't know if it might not be, I think I have another slide, but this is the labs that you want to request from your provider to understand the full picture of your thyroid health. So remember, TSH, it's just a brain hormone. It's not telling you what's going on downstream, the bigger picture of your thyroid. We want free T4, free T3. We want total T4, total T3, because all hormones are bound up, but only a certain percentage is free. For cellular metabolic impact. So the total measures what's free and what's bound up, and then free measures what is having an effect. So we want to know those. Reverse T3, this shows us how much stress we might be having and how it's impacting our free T3 levels. And then these are antibodies, so we can understand if there's any kind of autoimmune dynamic going on. Additional markers, so these are markers that can impact the thyroid. Selenium, the nutrient, it's a mineral. I mentioned that in a couple of previous slides ago. Iron, you get iron panel. Fasting glucose, fasting insulin, these help measure or understand what your blood sugar levels are doing. A1C also does. And then RBC zinc, red blood cell zinc, that means. And then lastly, a Dutch test. This stands for dried urinary test for comprehensive hormones. And that looks at your adrenal glands. It looks at all your sex hormones. You get a picture of your thyroid as well, B vitamins, how you're methylating, which means clearing out excess hormones, and gives you an idea about your genetic standing as well. So that's it. That's all I have for today. So I just again want you to just take a moment to think about what is the one thing that you're taking away today. And go ahead and you can journal it. You can share it with someone who's you may be watching this with, or just reflect on it, and see if you can then take that into action. Action is where everything happens. So that's what I want you to be able to do today is take one of those solutions, from dietary to sleep to stress, to the fluoride, and take that away, and implement it into your everyday life. Um, let's see if there's anything else I might be missing. I think that's it. But on to end here, I just want to say that, we're all a puzzle. Like, you may be a 500 piece puzzle, or you might be a 5,000 piece puzzle. But whatever you are is where you're meant to be. And the first thing we need to do is to just start putting those puzzle pieces together. And to do that, you have to dump them all out, spread them around, and start making those connections. And oftentimes we need to connect the edges first before we can start seeing the whole picture. But trust that every puzzle piece does come together. And I just want you to know that you are heard, and that if you are experiencing any symptoms of thyroid dysfunction, your symptoms are real. It's not in your head. And you just need to find a practitioner who's going to be able to offer you comprehensive, heartfelt care, that will really look into things and be patient and have the time to spend with you. So with that said, I know this was a pretty quick class, 50 minutes, so I can't really go into everything in 50 minutes, but go ahead and you can send questions to Heather or email me with any questions. I also do 15-minute free consults to see if we want to work together, if I'm offering you what you need, and if we'd be a good pair. And then I'm offering, I guess, listeners a 90-minute health assessment for, it's normally $150, and I'm offering it for $100. And the health assessment is a deep dive. We just throw all those puzzle pieces out, and we look at your health history, your symptoms, if you have any lab work, and I'll ask you tons of questions to hear your story, and then we start putting some of those puzzle pieces together and giving you an understanding of what might be going on. So I hope that was helpful for you. I do hope I get to hear from you. I do offer a newsletter, a monthly newsletter, because I don't like to bombard people. So you can feel free to sign up for that. You just go to my website, which is heather-tesch.com. Heather will also send the information about that. But please do stay in touch. And I think Heather will also be sending you a workbook. And I also have a thyroid nutrition handout for you as well. So be on the lookout for that. All right. Thank you so much for having me. I wish you all the best.